Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's dive into today's episode. Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. Today we have a fun guest, and her name is Hillary Miller. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Hillary, to introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Karen. So hi, everyone. My name's Hillary Miller. I'd like to start off with the human side of who I am. So I'm an Enneagram 8, a Scorpio, a Basset Hound mom of 3, an avid lover of the outdoors, a camper, a book enthusiast. And then when we think about work and the roles that I serve in, I currently serve as a chief learning officer for Penn State Health, serving the local community within the Commonwealth of PA. And the double bonus of working with Penn State Health is it is at the heart of Hershey. One of our medical centers is in the heart of Hershey with this access to chocolate. So, everybody says, "Oh, you get sick of it." I have yet to find that true. Love chocolate, so it's a double bonus for me.
That's fantastic. Well, I don't think I've ever told you this, that one of my biggest memories of as a child is going to Hershey, Pennsylvania and touring the factory. And it's just one of those things where, oh my gosh, this is amazing.
It's a fantastically beautiful place too. And although Penn State Health has spanned multiple counties, it started in the heart of Hershey and, Milton Hershey and the trust and all of those things. So there's an incredible backstory. If I could prompt you to look anything up, a lot of people don't know really how all of these things started. And so the story of Milton Hershey is pretty powerful.
That's fantastic. I remember you mentioning that at one point, thinking, okay, this is great. So that's awesome for people listening as well. Well, let's dive into you, because I am personally I've been so drawn to you since we met through the Culture Partners connection that we have. And I would love to know more about your confidence journey, and specifically would love to know how you got started. Is that something, for example, as a kid that you said, I really want to be a chief learning officer one day? So tell us.
No. No, I have never had like this clear path of like, this is who I want to be. I've just always been that kid that's been naturally curious and likes to try a lot of things. And learning has always been a core fundamental component for me. Grew up in a family of educators. My dad was a school superintendent for 40 years. My mom, a science teacher. Never any pressure to go into education. Of course, I was the only one in my family who went that route, outside of my parents. And I was one of those kids that literally liked to kind of get my hands on everything. And I was fortunate enough to be one of those people once I got into work, taking on projects that maybe other people didn't want to take on, or trying something different. I'm not afraid of failing. But I would say early in my career, that was a scary thing. I didn't want to look stupid. You attach that to competence, how those things are viewed. And so I would say my confidence has evolved. I'm confident as a person in me as a woman. I'm confident as a person who loves humans. I'm confident in my humor. It took me some time to get confident in my work capability, because I was letting something else define that for me. And I had to find my own definition in that. And that takes time, and it takes a little bit of courage too.
Absolutely. Well, I want to go back for a moment, because I feel like I want to unpack a lot that you said there, but specifically the piece about failure. So did I hear you correctly that it's fine now, like you're comfortable with failure, but there was a time, it sounds like, where you weren't? Is that true?
Yeah, just like the normal human reaction is like, oh, I don't want to do a bad job in this.
Yeah.
But I also really want to learn it. And I think it matters the environment you're in. But yeah, for a while, that was really scary for me, of not being the person who looked like they knew what they were doing. And then at some point, it wasn't like an epiphany or a turning point. I had some really great mentors throughout my career who just kind of saw something in me that I didn't, and helped me to cultivate that. Cause especially I think when you're early in your career, in your early 20s, um, those are things that you're not thinking about. And it's all like, oh, I got my degree and now I got to prove myself. And you get into the work world and then you realize, a lot of these things don't actually matter. It's your attitude and your willingness. And it's okay if you mess up. It's how you move through that and all that good stuff. So yeah.
Wow. Well, I think about Sarah Blakely, who's one of my favorite people, the CEO of Spanx, and how that story of when she was a kid, her dad would have them all go around the dinner table at the end of the day and share the mistakes that they made to celebrate and make it okay. And I thought, wow, can you imagine if every kid was raised like that? Because certainly for me, and I think more of the human race, we're raised for that your value is placed in what you produce and in your accomplishments, and that mistakes are not okay. And I feel like that has just been such a huge problem then when we take that to the workforce and then we inhibit innovation. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, like people that don't lean into failure.
Yeah, well, one, I think it crafts an identity where you are your job or you are your role. And so that's especially when I announce myself in something, I don't say, I am,
Mm-hmm.
a chief learning officer. My role is. So
Oh,
although I identify and I serve in this role, that role is not necessarily who I am as a whole. And I was fortunate enough as a kid, although we didn't go through and have an exercise specifically, we never got pressured to be something. Our focus in our family was, how do you show up with people? Are you respectful? Do you listen? Do you respect all levels? Like my dad would always say, especially in the public education system, you respect every single role that's in the system. We can't function without the janitor. If we don't have nutrition services, in the cafeteria, we can't have kids at school. I mean, just the great respect for this is a team thing. And although we have roles that do certain things, we can't function without. So it was respect from the entry level to the top educated. And I grew up in a household where you're not better than somebody else. And if you start something, finish it.
mm-hmm.
You don't have to stick with it after that, but you got to finish it. And I hated that sometimes because I'm like, I just want to quit. And he's like, figure it out, kiddo, and I'm like, okay. So I appreciate that now. I didn't at the time.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that brings up memories of when in second grade I was learning piano and I was really excited about it. But then my parents, which was so unusual for them, they let me quit. And I really apparently hated it. I don't even remember how much I hated, but I knew it was hard. Like it was hard. Well, then what's funny, in sixth grade, I wanted to get a flute. And they really drew the line there. They said, if you get that flute, you are playing that flute and you're never giving it up. So I'm happy to say that I did play and then it went on to play and and beyond anyway. But that brings back those memories, and it's so fascinating how these childhood experiences shape us so much. And what do you think was your biggest moment that shaped you from your past? Not necessarily your childhood, but just made the most impact on you.
Yeah. So I was a really sick kid. Had a lot of health problems. And so had to grow up pretty quickly.
Wow.
A lot of hospitalizations, just a lot of stuff going on. And so that resilience thing, I didn't even know what that word was at the time, but I had it.
Mhm.
And that really defined who I was as an adult. On the flip side, when you develop survival skills like that, sometimes those can be damaging as an adult because then everything is survival. So I actually had to learn how to work through that. Wonderful for what I was going through, not necessarily helpful in all situations, as I got older, but I had just a fantastic support system. Um, when you have crisis like that, that's for an extended period of time. Um, and having to worry about, life or death situations, I think that changes a lot of things. So things that I should have been worrying about as a kid, I wasn't.
Mm,
It was more of, gosh, do I feel good enough today? Great. I'm going to go out and play. But I've always been a fairly resilient person,
mhm.
pretty positive, naturally happy. That made me even more grateful in a lot of ways. And it's not like I didn't have my bad days. I had days where I was like, I'm so over this. But I had the support system, one, to let me voice that, two, to let me be in my feelings when I needed to, and three, to be the kick in the rear end when I needed to get out of my mud puddle. So it very, very helpful.
Mhm. Wow. And so many of us growing up did not get the teaching or the training to feel our feelings or the space. And I know for me, it was you just put your chin up and keep going. And can you tell us about, if you remember, even a time in which you were encouraged to feel those feelings and what?
Yeah, let's say I grew up that way. My dad was a pretty darn loving guy.
Mm.
And, if we had a cry, we weren't judged for the crying. It was like, okay, what's going on?
Wow.
Why do you feel that way? Let it out. What do you want to do with that information? Sometimes it was nothing. I just was like, I just need you to hear me out. Okay. My parents were pretty good about not forcing feedback. If my dad saw something he needed to intervene on, he would. But most of the time, he was just a fantastic listener. My mom, too. But also just uncanny intuitive on when he needed to pull me out of something and be like, okay, love you, need to redirect. You're heading down a path. It's probably not going to be awesome. And then other times he let me go down that path so I could learn that on my own. Always giving me some guardrails that way. But yeah, looking back now, because you don't think about those things at the time,
Right.
there was a lot of opportunity for me to just be.
Mhm.
And I've recognized now as an adult how fortunate I was to have that environment.
Yeah. It's incredible. It's so rare. And
Yeah.
both of your parents in that case. So how do you think that that has equipped you to be successful professionally?
Oh, well, I think the resilience piece, certainly, I'm not afraid of tough things. I like challenging situations. I care deeply about people. Just like any new manager when I was young in my career and promotions happen quickly and all those good things. Um, you go into it thinking I've got to be all knowing and do all things. And I went through my failures with that. I'm sure I have people in my past who saw me as a new manager, not so great with people. Although if I went home, great relationships, but I couldn't find my identity between the both of those things.
Mm.
So as I've gotten older, I'm like, why am I showing up one way here and one way in the other? Because I never really understood what authenticity meant.
Huh.
It's, until I got older and started to mature in my career. I didn't know what people meant when they said that. I'm like, what do you mean authenticity? Of course I'm showing up as me. Well, come to find out, I had a pretty good wall up. And that wasn't to block people out, it was to show up as something. And then I got to the place and have ever since. And gosh, it's so freeing to say, doesn't matter. You get so caught up in what people think. And
Yes.
then when you get past that place of, can I meet the criteria of I've been a good person today? I've done the best that I can do. My family loves me. I've got a great group of friends and we're doing meaningful work. I'm okay with that. And there's going to be times where people don't like me. It has nothing to do with me, has nothing, and it's none of my business. And so that was a very freeing thing, because we're community animals as humans. We care about and we, look at social media and all
I know.
those things that just fuel that sometimes if I have to be liked in order to be good at something. And that's not necessarily true.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Oh my goodness. I'm trying to decide. There's so many questions that I have for you. So I love the fact you mentioned this earlier. You mentioned courage, and you and I have a love for Brene Brown, both of us. And if you think about for yourself, again, I'd love to get an example. Can you think about an example you could share with us where you showed courage as a leader and what that was like for you?
Yeah. Courage in doing the right thing, even when it's not popular. So there's been many times because one of my core values is integrity. That's a big deal for me. And so when I don't feel aligned in that, that's really difficult. Integrity is not saying whatever you want to say when you want to say it. It's doing that with candor. And I'm a really big Kim Scott fan too, with radical
Mhm.
candor, but also the Brene Brown side of things. So when I think about courage, I've had very difficult situations where I've had to address something that nobody else was. And sometimes it resulted in really hard, decisions that we had to make, but we knew it was the right thing to do.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's an advocacy of somebody else who feels like they can't. And that's hard. And of course, I don't just, wing it and go into that. It's a calculated risk, but I'm a big fan of the right side versus the popular side.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's so important. And is there a story, for example, where you go, "Ah, this was a moment when I wasn't sure what was going to happen, but I knew in my gut or my heart that this was the right thing to do, and I
Yeah.
did."
Yeah. So without going into too much detail,
Sure.
had a leadership situation, past careers, um, where we had a leader that was not only going against the organizational values, but it was being allowed, and it was blatant and overt,
Oh,
unkind, to the point where people were crying, and all of these things. And finally, frankly, I just had enough and tried to have the conversation with that individual. That fell on deaf ears. And then all of a sudden, some things just got unearthed, unfortunately, because I think people deserve the grace to make a change. But sometimes there is a clear indication that that's not going to happen. That was the case. And
mm,
it led to the dismissal of that individual. And again, I don't celebrate those things, but I also have a fundamental issue with, we say this is something that matters here, and yet certain folks are exempted from that.
yeah.
And so I think we owe our people that in organizations, that we uphold the thing. And we're fallible, we're all going to slip up and not get that right. But when you're fundamentally going against those things, not being a kind human, I'm not talking about nice and surface level, genuinely kind. Hey, okay to disagree, okay to have dissent, okay to say I vehemently have a problem with something, not okay to disrespect somebody as a human. And
Mhm.
that was consistently happening. And so I had to serve as a advocate in a very difficult situation, that resulted in the departure, but it hands down was the right thing to do.
Mhm. That those decisions are so, or maybe the decisions aren't hard, but the actual execution of them can
Yeah.
be challenging. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you. That makes me think about many years ago when I was first starting out, and it was a small company where I was, and they no longer exist, but I was the HR manager. And I remember people would come talk to me about this one guy that was really challenging, and he would just blow up at people based on his mood. And he was the head of sales, and
Mm.
he's the one that brought in all the money. And it was a small company, around 15 people. And sadly, the person that owned the company never did anything about it. But it cost us a lot of major issues, and the morale and everything that you can imagine that could go wrong did when that kind of behavior is accepted and tolerated. And almost, I mean, obviously if it's tolerated, it's condoned or almost celebrated. Well, he's the guy that brings in all the money. But I always remember feeling so conflicted as a young person of, I there wasn't really a whole lot that I could do based on the decision makers in the company, but
Yeah.
all I could do is say like, this just isn't right.
Yeah,
And
well, and it can be risky sometimes, and I recognize that too. And I was willing to go with the risk in that situation. I think too, one thing I always remember is no response is a response.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so when we don't do something about it, we're automatically showcasing that there's an exemption here and
Mhm.
this population can opt in or out. And hey, we're saying this matters to everybody, but I'm not held to that.
Mhm.
And people are smart and they pay attention to these things. But two, I think when you've been given the opportunity to serve in a leadership role, we have a 100% responsibility to take care of people in our care, just like Simon Sinek always says.
Yeah.
And it's true, but you have to believe that. You have to believe that you're not there to manage people. You are there to manage things and process. You are there to lead and guide people and create more leaders. And it's a fundamental belief system that you have to have internally. And you can frame it under servants, servant leadership, whatever framework you want to use. But essentially, it's just I care more about the people and the success and the whole picture, not me as an individual. And I don't have to abide by these rules because I'm above that.
Mhm. Mhm. Oh, these things are so tough. I mean, what would you say is the biggest, well, let's talk about success.
Mm.
What are the biggest success stories where you go, or maybe one that you go, I was like, this was a big win, something that you celebrated either as yourself as an individual or as you being part of the team?
Oh gosh, there's so many. Um, I think one that can I give you two? One
Yeah,
personal, one
of
team.
course. Yes.
Um, so I've had the honor of leading a lot of teams throughout my career, and I had a really fantastic team in my past job. I have a great team now. But in a past life, I had a team that had been through a lot of different leadership. They'd had a lot of changes in design. So I was one more person coming into the fold that was going to change direction for them. So I learned very quickly to start doing listening tours before I touched a darn thing. And
Uh,
so went and listened to people and said, what's this look like for you? Met with hundreds of people before I touched anything. I am so glad that I did that because I found out things that I could have blown up had I said, oh, I have this expertise. I'm going to come in and just change everything to the way that I want it. Bad approach always. But two, it gave folks an opportunity to see me as a partner. And hey, I truly have your best interest in mind. And yep, we might change some things, but that won't be without some input,
mhm.
And so I would say that's a team and an individual win. But that was me growing through that. I could say early in my career, I was I gotta come in, I gotta be able to be the one who knows everything about everything and all knowing. And that was uncomfortable and so much work when
Yes.
you can just say, I have no idea. Let's figure that out together. God, is that freeing? Like I don't have all this extra pressure that I've now added to myself because I'm, you come in, everybody knows you don't know when you don't know
Right.
something. Yeah, we can't admit that to ourselves. But yeah, I think as I've unfolded throughout my career, it's been a progression. Um, but it's also helped me I don't look for work-life balance. It's more like integration
Yes.
because how I feel at home shows up in, what's happening at work and vice versa. And so I never look for this 50-50 split. It's more of like, what does this mean? And I might need more attention in one area, but those are successes for me too. So it's the fact that I found my path, my energy management, which has allowed me to be better with people.
Oh, that's fantastic. Such a huge payoff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you and I have so much in common. I feel like I remember a coach of mine many, many years ago, again, young in my career, who said, you take yourself with you wherever you go. Like, wow, is this balance thing even possible? It's about integration. And I think that's a really good call out. And I love the term. I want to also call this out to everybody in case you didn't hear this, everybody, listening tours. That is such a cool term. That's fantastic.
It's a nice way to say, hey, one, I come in peace. Two, I'm a human too.
Yeah.
But three, hey, tell me about what's going on. And it's so simple. I think sometimes we overcomplicate, especially when you've come into a new role or you've reorged or you're redesigning. Um, to come into those things with what you think you know, which usually is this much, especially in new roles with new organizations. And so it goes a long way to say, what's working well for you? Gosh, if you could fix one thing, what would that be?
Mhm.
What are your expectations of me? That gave me a really good dynamic of it was everything from you're going to solve all our processes to I hope you create really good training in our learning management system. So it's like this broad swath of this is what I think you do, which was also really helpful for me to make sure that my role was clear in the organization, but also really what that meant for them.
Mhm.
And so it doesn't matter how I define it if nobody understands it and they can't make sense of how to partner.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, in thinking about leaning into courage a little bit more, what what advice would you give someone? And I'm kind of leading the witness here. Whatever you want to share. But I think a lot of people that might be listening to this are going to have, just like most of humanity, those days where we don't feel very confident, or we know that we technically a decision that we want to make is probably the best decision to make, but we're afraid to make it, or we're afraid to speak up or step up, or whatever that would look like. What advice would you give to someone who's in that role or in that place?
Yeah. Well, so I'll probably forever be in it to some capacity. And I think it's okay to say that one, because do we ever really arrive? Probably not. Some of the things that are my biggest strength are also my biggest weakness, but I'm okay with that. And so I think it's one, don't let someone else define who you are. You may have role expectations, but that's very different than who you see yourself as. So that self-talk piece, huge. Because
Mhm.
if you're criticizing yourself before somebody can even get to you, doesn't matter what they say, you've already knocked it down a notch. So you got to find ways to have positive self-talk. And it doesn't mean, hey, I'm awesome at everything all the time. It means an awareness of where you actually at, while also fundamentally looking at the path that got you there. So if I just took a snapshot of who I am as a human up until this point in my life, work included, family included, my God, there is so much that I'm like, wow, I did that. But if I
Yeah.
don't take the time to reflect on that, so the self-talk, I think it's really important to have reflection. I have a really cool trusted tribe that one jumps in the mud puddle with me when I need it, but also kicks me right back out of it. And I want folks who are going to tell me when I don't want the niceties. I
Right.
want the folks who say, I care about you so much, but gosh, you're heading down this path you don't want to go down.
Mm.
Or I see that differently. Have you thought about X? And so the trusted tribe, really important. But I think the biggest thing is the definition around what success and courage are. Sometimes courage is just showing up.
Yeah.
Sometimes courage is, hey, I've had the ability to talk with somebody that I didn't like, and that was really hard for me, but I knew I had to work with them. Sometimes courage is, this isn't suiting me anymore. And my life has changed. We evolve as humans, something that felt really like a big deal and something really important that changes. Our life changes. We're chameleons. We're not the same person we were 2 years ago. And so
Right.
I think giving yourself some grace in the fact that we're also constantly evolving matters with our courage. So for me, like I said, if I can go home at night and I've got this great family and we're doing meaningful things at work, may not always be quote unquote successful, but we're helping people through a process or making something easier. I'm okay with that. It doesn't have to be these grand scale things. It's these small moments that add up to really big things.
Mhm. Yeah, that's powerful. I'm thinking about your team commitments.
Mm.
Will you tell us about how those evolved? And I'm thinking about people that might be listening to this that are struggling in their teams, or maybe they don't even realize what's available to them. And the example that you shared and the other work that we've done together was so powerful.
Yeah.
Share that?
Of course. Yeah. So one, This is really part of that braving inventory. So if I could point you to something with Brene Brown, it's her braving inventory.
Yeah.
And so all this is, in the simplest terms, is sitting down with your team and saying, hey, what's our rules? What's our rules together? What's our rules for communication? What's our rules for respect? How do we want to interact with each other? What are things that are non-negotiable versus we can have some flex on this? So I'll give you an example. Non-negotiable is us asking for help. Non-negotiable. You got a problem, you got to ask for help, me included. Negotiable, whether we're on video every day. So I'll have a team member come in, because we're in a hybrid virtual environment, and say, hey, I don't feel like being on camera today. Well, that's okay. We've created that rule that works for us. And again, this is the beauty of, having teams. You get to craft that with them. You will have 10 times the engagement when you have that level of inclusion to say, hey, I don't want to come up with all the ground rules for us. What matters to you? What matters to you? That's a great way too. It's much easier to champion work that you were a part of building.
Yes.
And so all team commitments is saying, this is what we say matters to us. This is how we show up in our work. This is what we care about together as humans. And it's also not manager to direct report. It's also peer to peer. So it shouldn't take me coming in and saying, hey, I saw this thing. It creates this framework where peers feel empowered enough to say, hey, I saw this happening. I need to be able to talk with you. Because if folks come to me and say, I have this problem with X, my first question always is, have you talked to them?
Yeah.
And if they say no, I say, how do they know if you haven't told them? And I think that extends to anybody. It's giving people the grace of, just because this thing happened doesn't necessarily mean that they're aware of it. So out of respect, let them know about this. And 99% of the time, somebody will go, oh my gosh, I had no idea that that's how you felt. I'm
Yes.
so sorry. Or how can we work through that? And then you have the 1% where you're like, okay, that wasn't helpful. Got to take a different path, probably, something else. But I mean, if you can look at the general population of having good intentions, it really helps you with that. But the team framework really is such a flexible thing, but don't get crazy, have 5 and say, these are the things that really matter the most to us. We can be flexible in other things, but these things we're not.
Yeah, it's so powerful when you sit down and have those conversations with your team, and especially as the leader, modeling that humility and just the openness to say, let's craft this together. So I think a lot of people need to hear that example, or at least I want a lot of people to hear that example. Let's say my
Yeah.
selfishness, because it makes such a difference, and people are going to have just happier teams and more productive teams, and everything gets easier when you start having these conversations and that are honest, and that that there's no judgment and there's safety there and inclusivity and all the things that we all want, but it's sometimes hard to actually live out.
It is. And tied into courage there, it's, if you have a team that's not doing this today, and maybe you have some dynamics or people have left or you have shortages or whatever that looks like, don't expect overnight success with these things. These are not overnight. Where you gain the trust and credibility is in the consistency. So don't look for traction the first week. That's where courage comes in to say, gosh, this matters enough that if I just keep sticking with it, they know it's not going away. And then they start joining into that. And sometimes you have another team member that can be a champion with you. And it's not this force feeding piece. It's more of that, gosh, can we go back to this? This is what we said mattered to us. This isn't showing up in that way. And that can be really sticky, but that's where the courage piece of being okay with it not going well every single time.
Yeah, that's really important to be said. And it goes
Mhm.
back to the grace part too that you shared. Let's recognize that. Well, is there anything, Hillary, that I haven't asked you that you want me to ask or that you'd like to share?
One is, the world's a complex place, and people are, everything we do is rooted in language. I mean, really and truly, if you break it down, it's how we communicate with each other, whether that's verbally or non-verbally or however, whatever that looks like, is it just goes a long way to step back for a minute. So if you're starting to head down this path of like everybody's bad and all these bad things are happening and this person doesn't support me, step back for a minute because we all go through that. I have emotions all day long. I've
Sure.
just learned what to latch onto. But I think the one thing you and I have talked about that's a helpful closure piece is the work of Byron Katie
Yes.
with the is it true? I can't think of a better framework that brings you closer to questioning your own belief system, which I think is important. The
Yeah.
things that we believed 5 years ago may not be serving us as best we think. And so her work, she has 4 key questions, but the first one is it true? And gosh, let me tell you something. Most of the time I don't get past that because it isn't true. So I'm like, okay, so I'll actually write it down on a physical piece of paper and whatever works for you, crumple it up and throw it away. That's you releasing whatever that thing that had a hold on you in whatever kind of way and trashing it and saying, yep, moving on, but without judging yourself for it. That's the key piece in this is
Yes.
you have, it's not only letting go of it, it's saying, it was okay that I felt that way. Gosh, I'm so glad I didn't do anything with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. Again, great wise words. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Hillary, for joining me on the show here, and tell me where we can reach you if you're open to it and we want
Oh, of
to.
course. Yeah. So best way for me, I'm not locked down in a profile, is on LinkedIn. That's a great way to connect with me. Feel free to shoot me a message. I'd be happy to connect. And then of course, my always leaving statement is do something that's contributing to somebody else. So sometimes you can be that person who's helping somebody else on their path and you don't even know it. So extend that gratitude to other people. But yeah, feel free to contact me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Hillary. Great to have
Thank,
you here
thank
today.
you, Karen.
And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.